Welcome to another episode of the Black Beauty Activist Podcast, where we discuss critical conversations to disrupt westernized beauty standards and raise the consciousness and confidence of the Black community. I am your host, Dr. Tamika. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a scholar, empowerment speaker, and author. And in today's episode, we will be discussing Black hair discrimination and the decentering of whiteness in the workplace. And I'm sure many of you all are wondering what that exactly means. And my next guest will break that down for you in this episode. But before we start, I just want to give a loving congratulations to my son, Maxwell, who just completed his 5th grade graduation yesterday, and my son, Xavier, who is having his 8th grade graduation this evening. So I'll be a graduated mom. We're going to have a good time tonight, and I'm just so proud of you boys. And I can't wait to see the amazing things that you all do. But let's get into the episode. And so my journey to studying Black beauty, particularly Black hair, started when I was about 19 years old. The summer of the end of my freshman year in college, I decided to go and work for an amusement park because I could live on the dorms that was housed on the park grounds, which allowed me to preserve my newly found adult independence. I soon discovered that there was not a way that I was going to be able to stay at this amusement park. During the new employee orientation, I, as well as all of the new recruits, were told that we were not allowed to wear certain types of elements with our wardrobe. So back then, you couldn't have a whole lot of piercings, you couldn't have a whole lot of tattoos showing. And then they got to the part about hairstyles, and they started talking about how we couldn't wear cornrows, we couldn't wear locks, we couldn't wear afros. And they basically said all of our employees for this amusement park need to look all American because we have people coming internationally to come to this park. And so basically what they were telling me is that cornrows and locks and afros is not American. And I just knew from there I wasn't going to be able to stay because I was actually in the process of transitioning from wearing my hair straightened to wearing my natural hair, which I am proud to say I've been rocking my natural hair since 1998. And this was my first experience with hair discrimination. And it led me to more than 20 years of research inquiry where I've published several articles, curated an internationally renowned museum exhibition, Textures, the History and Art of Black Hair, and now dropping a new book in July called Black Hair in a White World. About a year or so ago, I was scrolling through LinkedIn and came across an article called The Pink Elephant, which was a euphemism for the racial discrimination that people of color often face in predominantly white spaces. Because I'm an advocate for social justice and because I am an advocate, I actually gravitated towards this impactful, authentic stories of the pink elephant. And they also, in this particular article, they would give things like strategies that companies can use to help better their environment for all peoples. And I was just really attracted to that article. And so I decided, because I liked the article, I decided to find out who the author was. And then I started following the author and found out, more about her and the work that she was doing. And then several months ago, she actually really had me excited because she did a post reflecting on all the hairstyles she'd worn in a year. And so that is what prompted me to finally connect with her to ask for an interview. And so I'm speaking of none other than DEI expert Janice Asere. And so I'm going to add her on into the space. Hello, Dr. Janice.
Hi, Dr. Tamika. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. First of all, I want to ask where your museum exhibition is because if it's still up, I would love to go see it.
Yeah, it was at Kent State University, and it's no longer installed, but I can send you a link where you can see the virtual tour. So I have a virtual tour of the exhibition, and I'll make sure that I send that to you. And then if you look on my bookshelf in the back, There's our book that we published for the exhibition called Textures, the History and Art of Black Hair, which has gotten several awards. And so we've been pretty proud of Textures. So yeah, but I'll make sure I send you the link so that you can see the virtual tour.
Yeah, that's awesome. And congratulations to your sons on their graduations.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to read your bio, Dr. Janice, so that everybody knows what an incredible woman you are. And so Dr. Janice Z. Gassam Asare is the founder of BWG Business Solutions, an award-winning DEI. And so for those of you that don't know what DEI means, by now you should, everybody should, but that means diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's this BWG Business Solutions is an award-winning DEI consultancy designed to help organizations create cultures built on racial equity. Dr. Janice facilitates workshops, provides guidance, delivers a keynote speeches, as well as awareness talks to spark important dialogue about racial equity in the workplace. Dr. Janice had the opportunity to collaborate with Google, Amazon, Yale University, Nordstrom, H&M, and PayPal and Venmo, among others. Dr. Janice is the author of 2 best-selling books, Dirty Diversity, a practical guide to foster an equitable and inclusive workplace for all, and The Pink Elephant, a practical guide to creating anti-racist organizations. And of course, she has a forthcoming book called Decentering Whiteness in the Workplace, which will be released by, how do you pronounce that? Barrett Collier?
Barrett Kohler.
Barrett Kohler Publishing. She is a senior contributing writer for Forbes, having authored over 350 articles, a Harvard Business Review contributor, and LinkedIn Learning instructor. In 2022, Dr. Janice was recognized as one of LinkedIn's top voices in racial equity. In 2023, she was recognized by Gusto as one of the 25 top workplace experts to follow. She is a TEDx speaker and host of the Dirty Diversity podcast, where she discusses all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so again, welcome Dr. Janice to the Black Beauty Activist podcast. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tamika. It's so great to be with you here. And I love that you have such an extensive background, particularly when it comes to like the nuances of our hair and Black hair. So I love all the work that you're doing, and I can't wait to get your book when it comes out. So I'm excited to be here with you.
Thank you. And you're in New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so I will be in New York in July. I'm coming for a book tour, and July 28th and 29th, I will be in Harlem, I think Brooklyn, and then Brooklyn. Did you know about the on the 29th is International I Love Braids Day? Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that, and that's actually my partner's birthday. So
on
the 29th we're traveling. So I might be gone on the 28th and 29th, but I'm sure you'll be back in New York. So I feel like we'll get a chance to meet.
Absolutely. So let's jump into this interview, because when you said yes, I was so happy and so excited. So I was like, I can't wait to interview, because I have so many amazing questions for you. So if you would please tell us a little bit about you, how you grew up, and how you discovered that doing DEI work was your passion.
Yeah, such a great question. I think many of our passions are birthed out of just our experiences.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, watching my parents and what they experienced, just navigating the workplace, and both of my parents were educators, and they experienced a lot of racism, a lot of anti-Blackness in the spaces that they were in. My dad was in higher ed, and my mom taught secondary school. And watching that really made me, I think, have an interest in racism. And I've always been, even as a kid, like really interested, because I was always the only Black person in my classes. Lived in a mostly white neighborhood until I got into my last years of high school. So I was always hyper aware that I was different from everyone else. And I think all of those things sort of led me into a career of wanting to figure out like how to make sure people's experiences in the workplace are the best experiences as possible, understanding and knowing how Black employees, specifically here in the US, often have the most severe forms of marginalization, right?
Yeah.
And they have some of the most severe forms of bias that they experience in the workplace. So I think I just have always really been interested in making sure that our experiences are good because we spend so much time at work that it's like
Absolutely.
we don't want to go into places where we just feel like so much stress and anxiety, which
Yep.
so many Americans, we go into our jobs and we just feel this sense of anxiety. So I think that's what really sparked my interest in this work.
Yeah. Wow. Would you say that someone who works in DEI spaces have to be a hopeless optimist? And so basically, what I mean by that is, somebody that knows change has happened and that new change is coming. So many of us get downtrodden about what's been going on in society and what we've still continued to face. And it seems like to be someone that does this kind of work, you have to be this hopeless optimist. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I know that I think in the book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Angela Davis wrote something, right? Like they asked her a question and she answered it. Are you, I think they asked her, like, are you optimistic or are you hopeful? And she said, you have no choice but to be optimistic when you're doing this work because every single day we turn on the TV or we open our phones and we see
Mhm.
something that is more depressing where another lawmaker in another state is trying to take away people's rights, whether it's
Yeah.
women's rights, whether it's birthing people's rights, whether it's LGBTQIA plus communities, whether it's Black people and the teaching of Black history. And so I think that it can be very disheartening. And so I try to stay optimistic and think about how much progress has been made, even
Yeah.
like the last 50 to 70 years,
Yeah.
how things were then and how things have evolved now, even if
Yeah.
they're not where we want them to be. And so I think I'm a overly optimistic and hopelessly optimistic person. You have to be doing this work.
Yeah, you absolutely do have to be. And you have to be somebody who's someone that's okay with constantly being in battle.
Hmm.
You really do. So, speaking of people taking away rights, how do you see the new Senate bills on DEI impacting corporate and other workspaces regarding uh, how Black people show up to work? So, as a professional, I'm also curious as to how is this impacting any future opportunities that you're having because for those of you that don't know, there are several Senate bills across the United States in various states where they are trying to remove funding for DEI research, DEI teaching, DEI programming. So they're trying to get rid of all of the DEI work that's been done over the years. And the way that they're doing that is by threatening to not fund uh, public spaces. And so, what do you think is going to be the impact of that for Black people? And then as a professional, has that been impacting you at all?
Yeah, I would definitely say it has the most negative impacts on Black people
Yeah,
because we are, when you look in the tech space, for example, Black and Latina employees are severely underrepresented. And so something like affirmative action, which is being debated in the Supreme Court, right? They're looking at it from the perspective of higher ed and whether colleges and universities should be using affirmative action because there's been some backlash and pushback from, I think one of the students is of Asian descent who is currently involved in the lawsuit where he feels like he was denied admission to a certain institution because of some sort of like preferential bias or whatever the case may be. But I think that when you look at the data and you look at how affirmative action has impacted just higher ed, the presence of affirmative action programs has actually increased the number of underrepresented groups, right?
yeah,
Women, white women benefit most from affirmative action programs, but also underrepresented racial groups having
yeah,
affirmative
yeah,
action programs increases representation. So
Right.
anyone that understands that the data and the information knows that this will have Black employees will bear the brunt of taking away and stripping
Right.
away affirmative action programs. And even though it's mostly in higher ed right now where DEI initiatives are being defunded, in states like Texas, we're seeing that it's spilling over into corporate spaces and public funding. So organizations and institutions that receive state funding are probably scared and tiptoeing around DEI now, where I'm seeing a lot of universities are, like defunding their DEI efforts. I think I've definitely seen in the last just 3 years, since last week was the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, just looking back the last 3 years, 2023 has definitely been much slower from a consulting perspective. Not as clients and companies are reaching out, but I do attribute that to the economic state of
Yep.
world and how many countries are not in the best position economically. I
Yep.
would say that even in 2020, when the Trump administration proposed the DEI training ban, where Trump was basically trying to get a ban instituted for any government agencies that were getting DEI training, the administration essentially said that it couldn't be anything based on critical race theory or that blamed white people for systemic racism. And I saw a little bit of, pushback from some companies, but I think a lot of organizational leaders, especially private companies, understand that even from a monetary standpoint, having people from different backgrounds increases your profits, right? So
Absolutely.
playing into this whole anti-DEI sort of sentiment is not going to be sustainable for businesses. So I have seen a slowdown, but I think it's more so because a lot of businesses are just kind of suffering financially. But I don't think that the slowdown is necessarily from all of the pushback, even though there has been a lot of criticism,
Yeah. One thing I will say, as you were speaking about affirmative action, if there was a policy that could be altered, it would definitely be that one, in my opinion. And part of the reason why is because it left out this whole essence of, hire people that are underrepresented, but there's nothing in place that makes sure that those people will be protected once they get there. So they hire all these folks, and then it's like a revolving door. The people, they feel unwelcome and they leave, and then they have to rehire all over again. And actually, I had a friend of mine who reached out to me a few months ago, who was asking me about some consulting work. And I told her, that policies need to change before they are able to see any kind of change. And she was a little surprised to hear that, but it's not just like a one little workshop thing. You really have to go through and change those policies, but I've been noticing that there is a change, and you're absolutely right. It's definitely due to our economy right now. And honestly, when we were in the whole George Floyd, movement, people were super, interested and, and getting more information about how they can support Black people, and, wanting to have training and things like that. And so, we'll see how it all shakes out, right, in the next couple of years. But you recently published an article in Harvard Business Review entitled "How Hair Discrimination Affects Black Women at Work." You are also the host of the Dirty Diversity podcast. I love that name. I love that name. And in the last episode, I listened to your last episode, you mentioned that there were 4 ways that hair discrimination shows up in the workplace. And so, just briefly, I'm going to reiterate what you said. You said number 1 was microaggressions, which comes across as like negative comments that people get. Number 2 is hiring bias, which means people may not get hired because of their choice to wear their hair during the interviewing process. Discriminatory policies, which we all understand what that is. Inequitable treatment, people being asked to change their hair, or people being demoted because they refuse to change their hair, right? Can you please discuss a hair discrimination experience you personally faced?
Hmm. Yeah, so I actually talk about this in my book, my upcoming book, Decentering Whiteness in the Workplace. But when I was trying to, my partner and I were saving up for our wedding, we were doing like a destination wedding. And we were, I was in a really weird period where I just graduated with my PhD, but I hadn't started my full-time teaching job yet. And it was the summertime. And
Yeah.
so I was like, it was in a weird position where I was starting in August. Our wedding was in September, so we needed to. So I was like, I've always wanted to learn more about New York because I'm not originally from New York. So I
Mhm.
actually looked into, and a friend of mine, her daughter was a tour guide for
Yeah.
in city. So I got into tour guiding. So I was working on, if anyone has ever been to Times Square and seen those red double-decker buses,
Yes.
on the double-decker buses, and so the bus goes through Manhattan into into Brooklyn and back into Manhattan. So I was on there, and we had to wear a certain uniform. It was red polo shirt that had the company logo on it, and dark pants or a dark bottom, and a red hat that had the company's logo on it. And the hat didn't fit my hair. And so what I was doing was I just found a red hat on Amazon that was bigger, and I was just wearing that. And I was like, switching it up. And one day the manager came in and she's like, "You're not wearing the hat. You're not wearing your uniform." And she threatened to write me up because I wasn't wearing the full uniform, right? Without any sort of consideration to the fact that this uniform, the policy is you have to wear the uniform, but the policy is not inclusive of different types of people. It's not inclusive of
Right.
people with thick, curly hair. It's
Right.
not inclusive to maybe someone that wears a hijab, or
Right.
for religious reasons they're not showing their hair. It's
Right.
not inclusive of a Sikh person who has a turban. So
Mhm.
there were things that I was just thinking about, and I was like, this is not really like an inclusive policy. And so that
Mhm.
was something where if I wanted to get written up, I could have kept wearing the hat that fit my hair. There was no consideration to like, let's reach out to the company that supplies us with the uniforms and see if they can get you a hat that fits, right? It was
Yeah.
just, this
Right.
is the policy. If you're not adhering to the policy, you are not following the rules and you'll get written up. So that was like a very sort of
Mm.
blatant example for me of hair discrimination in the
Wow.
workplace that I've
Yeah.
experienced. Another experience I had, not in the workplace, is I'm on this like BuzzFeed casting email because I applied to something years ago. And so they send me emails periodically about casting calls that they have in New York City. And I got an email for a braiding show they were doing. And they were like, "We're looking for hair models." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And this was just 3 years ago. It was in 2020. They're like, "We're looking for hair models." But the email specifically said that they were looking for people with type 3 hair. Right. And when I saw
Oh,
that email,
oh,
I was like,
oh,
we're
wow.
doing a braiding show to showcase the versatility of Black hair. And in the ad, you're discriminating against people with type 4 hair, with kinkier and curlier hair textures. And I sent a long email back. Of course, no one responded. I don't know if they ever went through with the show. It was supposed to be like some kind of show on YouTube. I don't know if they ever went through with it, but I think that those things happen so often, and people don't even realize that in 2023 those types of things are still happening.
That's ridiculous. Oh, I could only imagine when you saw that you're like, and the fact that they didn't even respond,
Yeah,
they knew
yeah,
that they were in the wrong, I'm
yeah,
sure. Yeah.
exactly.
Uh, what can people expect from your book? I'm excited to get it. I actually already pre-ordered the book, and so
Oh, thank you so
what?
much.
Yeah, absolutely. When I saw the book, I was like, oh, I got to get it. So, what would you say that you are expecting people to get from this book, and why did you feel it was important to write the book?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think especially because there's so many books, especially since 2020, there's a lot of books on DEI and equity in the workplace. And so
Yeah,
I think a lot of people might say, well, what makes your book different from the tons of books that are already out there? But what's
right.
really interesting, Dr. Tamika, is when I did my research, there were very few books about the workplace that specifically talk about white supremacy culture and whiteness. A lot
Mm,
of the books are about DEI, and some of them are about racial equity, but there's nothing that really talks about the system of whiteness and how it impacts the workplace. And I think that the closest book that I could think of when I was researching was the book by Layla Sayad called Me and White Supremacy. And Layla Sayad actually wrote she's a New York Times bestselling writer, and she wrote the foreword of the book. And
Nice.
her
Very
book
nice.
was the only one that I could find, but her book it talks about white supremacy culture in general, right? White supremacy within ourselves, white supremacy in the world that we live in. But there weren't any books except one, I think, academic book maybe that looked at how whiteness is centered, I think, in the vegan spaces, but there wasn't anything that talked about it in the workplace. And I think that any workplace that's trying to really create equitable spaces where people feel safe have to understand and address the ways that we unconsciously and consciously center whiteness, whether that's through our policies, like, the uniforms that people have to wear. When we think about those policies, they were created with white employees in mind, right? And so I think that I really try to break down how whiteness is centered in our policies when we're hiring people, when we're looking through resumes and evaluating employees, even in meetings, when we're having meetings, how white voices are centered. And also I talk very candidly about how I've centered whiteness in my own life and the ways that now, years later, I can recognize that.
Wow, that's deep. I mean, and for you to be willing to put forth that much honesty, because it's hard to talk about that kind of thing, because I think, we all know that we are brainwashed, but how much of that we want to admit to is subjective, right? But the fact that you were willing to be vulnerable in that, and knowing that, at some point in every colored person of color life, we all have centered whiteness, because that's what we've been taught.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think that when we have the conversation about white supremacy culture and whiteness, a lot of us don't look at ourselves as non-white people. I think sometimes the conversation is very binary. It's like white people and the ways that white people are racist, but we don't also think about like how we're all, I think it was Bell Hooks who said something like, we're all like breathing white supremacy in the air. Right. And so we're all like taking it into our lungs and exhaling it out. And so there are long-term effects of that. Right. And so I think that we don't look at how we as Black people have internalized anti-Blackness and internalized anti-Black views. And so like we don't have enough of those types of conversations. So I'm really hoping that the book provides insights into a conversation that we're not having as much about, specifically white supremacy in the workplace, how whiteness as a system and a structure shows up in different workplaces, and then also specifically how to decenter whiteness in the workplace.
Yeah, and what you were just saying about how Black people not recognizing their anti-Blackness. And I'm just going to say it, one of the ways that we don't recognize our anti-Blackness is in our hairstyles. And because I'm an advocate about it, I'm not even going to get into it because that would be a longer conversation. But people, we need to wake up in many ways. We are still brainwashed when it comes to our overall idea of aesthetic beauty, and so we need to wake up. But
there was two, I won't name them, but there was two, I remember last year, maybe there were two housewives from Real Housewives of Potomac. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but they got on the radio and were talking about, I'm not big into sports, but some athlete's hair and how his hair was nappy. And they use that, I think they use that term nappy, where they said something about his hair. And I'm like, it's wild that in 2023 people don't understand, Black people at that, two women that identify as Black don't understand how anti-Black critiquing and denigrating a Black man's hair is. Like we've all been sipping drinking the water, waters. So I think it shows up more often than we realize.
Hey, I just wrote an article for World Bright magazine and it'll be coming out real soon. It's about the response that people gave to Simone Biles's hair on her wedding day, and
Yeah.
how they were talking about her edges weren't straight enough.
Yeah.
Okay, people, we need to get over this stuff. We
Yeah.
really do. And I'm almost 100% certain that it was us who were talking about her edges.
A
You
hundred
know,
percent.
white people don't care about black people's edges.
Yeah.
It was us. We were the ones criticizing her edges. So we have a lot of work to do. But I wanted to find out if there's anything you would like to discuss that we didn't touch on.
I think that we talked about so much, and I think that we have to, the listeners really have to think about, especially the non-white listeners, ways that maybe we continue to center whiteness and we haven't been able to like decenter or divest from whiteness in our lives. And I've been trying to think a lot more about that, because I think to create a world that is a better place for the future generations, we have to also be interrogating how we contribute to systems that oppress people, right? Even systems that oppress our own communities, right?
Yeah.
And the ways that internalized oppression shows up for us. And I think for a lot of people, for a lot of Black folks, it's our hair, it's in our parents, it's respectability and the ways that we think we can or can't show up on a call, right? It's the fact that when COVID hit, I was so terrified to wear a turban. I love the turban that you have. And I was so terrified because I was the only Black woman in my department, and I wasn't able to really, I don't know how to do my hair, and I wasn't able to go see any hairstylist, right? I wasn't able to get my braids or get any of my styles. So I was like, I don't know what to do with my hair. I could do a twist out, but I don't know. So I had my hair in twists a lot. And I was like, are my colleagues going to judge me if I show up on this video call with the turban, right? And so even things like that I recognize how deeply rooted my anti-Black beliefs have been throughout my life. And it's, no one told me, right? It wasn't my family or anyone who said, you look better this way. My mom actually encourages me to rock all these hairstyles and do this and do that. But I think it's like what I see in the media. And when I would turn on the TV when I was a teenager, I didn't see anyone that looked like me, with hair like me, with this, with that. So I think like really making sure that we're actively interrogating the ways that we have internalized whiteness and white systems, and also like the importance of community. Because I think it's hard to do that alone. And being a community of people, someone might say, Dr. Tamika, what you just said, that wasn't it, right? But I think that's there's so much beauty and power and strength and accountability in our communities. And so us not being scared to lean into our community and cultivate a community of people that we respect and that we value, so that we do make mistakes. All of us are going to make mistakes. We have that, what a friend of mine, Brittany Janae, calls loving accountability. We have that loving accountability.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I want to thank you for this interview. And how can the audience stay connected with you, and how can they pre-order your book?
Yes, so pre-order my book on Amazon. So for anyone who's listening from outside of the US, Amazon is the best place to pre-order the book. If you just type in Decentering Whiteness, I think I'm the first. My book might be the first up, but you can find me. I'm mostly on LinkedIn, but I'm also on Instagram at Janice Gasamasare. If you put that into the search bar, you'll pull me up. I'm on TikTok and all that, but I'm trying to get more consistent. And I'm here on YouTube as well. So you can catch me anywhere.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Janice. It was a pleasure having you, and I wish you peace and blessings.
Thank you. And congratulations again to your sons.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. I'll be in touch.
Okay, great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. So this is the part of the podcast where I typically will talk about some research, but what I do want to do today is I actually do want to shout out the Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who just signed the Crown Act into law. For those of you that don't know what the Crown Act is, and I'm sure you've heard me, if you've been listening to this podcast, you've heard me talk about it before. And so the Crown Act is legislation that prohibits Black people from being discriminated against because of their hair. And so Texas now has that as a law. And so I'm just saying, Ohio, you guys need to show up. Where are you and what are you waiting on, Ohio? So this particular episode of the Black Beauty Activist podcast was brought to you by my upcoming event. So I have a women's event coming up on June 10th, Reset to Revolutionary. This women's empowerment event will be held in downtown Cleveland, and there's going to be some incredible speakers there. We're going to be discussing some strategies that can help women level up their personal and professional lives. And everything I do, I try to bring empowerment to myself and others, and this event is no different. So please go ahead and get your tickets on Eventbrite, and I look forward to seeing you there. And also, I just want to shout out again my book, Black Hair in a White World. Is available for pre-order now. You can get it on Barnes and Noble and Amazon. Make sure that you go and pick it up. It'll be delivered to you by, I think now they're saying they can get it by July 3rd, which is actual National Crown Act Day. So I'm really excited about that. And I just want to thank you all for listening and being with me here today as we talk about this important topic of hair discrimination. And if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure that you leave a comment on YouTube and Facebook. Share it with those in your circle who you believe will benefit. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Black Beauty Activist Podcast. And always remember, on the other side of fear is your beautiful confidence. Have a good night, everybody.